We're now live on YouTube again, Chairman.
Thank you, Jeanette. If you would like to continue with your question, just to be clear that this is questions, you'll have your opportunity to make your full case shortly.
Sergeant, I think you've made it clear throughout that you feel that all the rules, regulations and guidance on coronavirus are crystal clear. Is that correct?
What do you mean?
Sorry?
If you're asking me, do I think that if you're in charge of one business, that it should be within your remit as a businessman to know the conditions in relation to your business? Yes. I think it's quite hard for the police and for the councils who have beauty salons, dog parlours, restaurants and pubs to know all of it. But I think if you own and run a licensed pub, it looks like a pub, smells like a pub, tastes like a pub, it is a pub. No, I don't think it is particularly hard to know what you should be doing, given the massive amount of publicity given by the councils and the government to what those regulations are. I think last year, at the onset of this, yes, there could have been some confusion. Do I believe on the 12th of April, when premises were allowed to reopen, that there was any real confusion about what they should be doing? No, it was quite simple to do it. So
your opinion that on the 12th of April that it was clear to all publicans, or it should have been clear to them, what the guidance and the rules were?
I believe it was quite clear to them what it was. I also believe that if they were confused and weren't sure, that they should have been quite easily able to access the information, whether it be from a government website, from a council website, or council. I don't accept that mistakes happen because people, or certainly in relation to this case, I don't accept that what we've seen is because they've misinterpreted the rules. I believe it's a lack of care and a lack of management.
Page 24 of the bundle of papers that I've got, your representations. The very top paragraph, you refer to the 2021 regulations themselves, the actual statutory rules. And then you referred to a useful document produced by Birmingham City Council and West Midlands Police, which is then extracted at page 36 to 43 of the bundle. I think giving that an example of the sorts of information that you say is readily and clearly available to publicans. Is that right?
Yes, that's an example. But obviously there are trade ones, there are council ones, there are numerous different ones, but all have the same theme.
Okay. I appreciate that you're a police officer and I'm a solicitor, and maybe we therefore have or should have a greater understanding of what the rules and the regulations are. But have you tried to search for that document online?
Throughout the pandemic, because we're in the same situation as everyone else, I've tried to search for numerous things. And I know if you put in COVID regulations, you find documents that provide you with a route of how to be COVID secure quite easily. If you put government COVID ones, it brings up the government pages. You can do it locally, you can do it nationally, you can do it regionally. So I will not accept in any way, shape or form that by April this year, it wasn't hard to find documentation that would give you a clear idea. And also,
but I'm dealing with this document at the moment. You've already answered that question previous.
That document isn't something that we're saying we expect Mr. Blakey to adhere to. We're saying,
Yeah, but you're giving it as an example of the sorts of things that are available online,
Yes.
aren't you?
so
So we haven't established can it
search
be
for that.
found online.
Sorry.
So I'm asking, we have to establish can it be found online, and you're saying that can be only
found it
found.
online, didn't she? So obviously, it can be.
Sorry.
Peter McConville found it online. That's just use that as an example. So it obviously can be found online.
Yes, but unless you're actually searching for the actual headed document, I put it to you. I couldn't find it yesterday. I searched coronavirus restrictions on pubs, guidance for pubs reopening the 12th of April. It was very difficult to find clear, cogent guidance other than the actual statutory regulations.
No, I disagree. And also, you use the phrase that we're police officers and you're a solicitor. These gentlemen are licensees. They're professionals. So they have trade organisations.
They are, but they're not used to statutory provisions like you or I are.
No, but they have laws, they have regulations, they have things they know they have to adhere to. The expectation is, as a professional businessman, you should be able to find that.
They do, but this is an ever-changing situation, isn't it?
Again, I disagree because the Facebook page showed,
Well, we'll come to the Facebook page in a moment, but your evidence is that basically any decent publican should have found the information easily online that they needed.
Yes, I agree. They should have done.
Let's have a look at this guidance that you've produced from Birmingham City Council and West Midlands Police, because you're saying everything's clear. If the information's there, it's all clear. Paragraph 7.2 on page 38. What we don't know, as at the 19th of March, any specific restrictions on entertainment. And then I refer you to paragraph 9A at the bottom of page 39. At this time, neither the legislation or the guidance makes a definitive statement about outside entertainment recorded or live. Although it goes on to say we expect you to not do anything to encourage singing, dancing, etc. Even the guidance is saying we don't know. Things are not certain. Would you not agree?
Can I ask you to make a question? Thank you.
I would agree that probably mid-March we weren't sure because we were nowhere near doing it. I would suggest that closer to the 12th of April things became clearer because the government released, they had press conferences, they released more information. And even if not, are you suggesting that what they should have done was just open and done what they wanted to do if they weren't sure?
That's not the question that I'm asking you at the moment. I'm talking about the clarity of information and guidance that was available at the time.
But that's on the 19th, that's a month
Yes,
before,
but if you look at the document, if you turn to page 43,
yes, it's got the printed date.
page 43, it says it was updated on the 9th of April, which is 3 days before we go into step 2. And paragraph 9A reflects the information at the 9th of April. There's no definitive statement about outside entertainment.
What's your question?
The point that I'm making is that not all the guidance and information is clear and readily available, and certainly not at the time.
But they had a meeting, telephone conversation with Mr. Davis.
We'll come to the meeting.
And it says no singing, dancing, raise your voices or crowding together. And the video clearly shows singing, dancing. So even if they weren't sure about the levels of music, it was quite clear from the outset of this pandemic.
There's no rule there that says you can't have an outside DJ.
Mr. Shackleton, can I remind you that at this moment in time, it is specifically you are asking questions to clarify what the police have said in terms of elaborating, making points, pointing out dates, guidance was updated, etc. You'll have that opportunity to do that in your time to address members. So please keep it to questions. Thank you.
The event, if we can call it that, you've made reference to a post on Facebook, which should be in the screenshots.
Page 33.
Apologies, it's not readily to hand, but if you recall, there was some comment about we're going to play some music that we've put together over the last year or so. That in itself is not a breach of any regulations, is it, officer? To
No, not at all. No, as long as it's played at a reasonable level and it's a controlled environment. No.
And then we turn to the screenshot on page 33, a posting made by Casey Blakely as the DPS, which is actually only a partial screenshot. I've got 2 copies here. I hate to pass papers in the current pandemic, but I've got copies available here. But at the very bottom, so you'll see it says, any questions, just get in touch with me. It then goes on to say, people not abiding by these rules will be asked to leave, as we will have the police checking in at some point during the day, as we've already had the call. So we want to make it as safe and as fun at the same time. We want to make the railway the new go place, and we can do that if people respect what's in place. Looking forward to seeing you all tomorrow. There's a love heart. Do you recall seeing that on the screenshot?
Yes.
And if we look at the screenshot, would you not say, although not all the rules are referred to, that Mr. Blakely's trying to set some rules there, isn't he? He's trying to keep to the guidelines.
It appears so initially.
So
That's why it's more confusing as to why he lost
bring a
it.
mask, card payments, tables of 6, seems to suggest an intention at the outset that we're going to try and comply with whatever the government guidance is.
Yeah, I'll agree with that.
And he's even said, we've got to be careful because we know the police are watching us. We've already had the call. We want to make it safe and we want to make it fun.
Questions, Mr. Shackleton, please. Questions.
The question being is that clearly the Facebook post demonstrates that the pub has started out with the intention of setting clear rules and guidelines that comply with COVID rules.
It started out as that, perhaps, yes.
Okay. And then we move to your account. We'll deal with the meeting on the 13th of April when Mr. Davis gives evidence, because you weren't present then, were you?
I wasn't there, so I can't
Okay.
comment on it. If you speak to Miss Davis about that, I suggest.
But we've got an incident report on the 16th of April, the day before the event, haven't we? Page 24, incident 476 at 9:35 hours. Caller says no social distancing.
Yes.
Okay. Apart from that information there that appears before us, is there any other evidence or corroboration of what the caller said for the 16th of April?
No.
Okay. No other complaints appear to have been recorded for that evening.
No, I don't believe any music was playing at that time.
Then we go on to the event day, the 17th of April. There's unfortunately absolutely no dispute that the music was played too loud and that there were a number of complaints during the course of the day. But you've talked about the event being uncontrolled, used quite strong language. At 18:44 hours, a police officer attended, didn't he, officer?
That's correct.
And although unfortunately there's the issue with the noise, he said everybody was adhering to social distancing.
It was at the time he was there, yes.
Yes. The event started at 12 noon, so this is 6 hours, 44 minutes into the event.
Yes.
And I assume that had the officer seen the sorts of stuff we've seen on the video or any other COVID breaches, that he would have made some intervention.
I would hope so.
And so one can only readily assume that there were no COVID concerns. It was just the music because he didn't intervene.
Partly, but again, how long the officer stopped there, there was clearly an outside bar that the officer didn't see. So again, to say that we've reported it because that's what the officer said, had it been a licensing officer or someone similar who had spent more time there, they may have found more breaches. As a response officer,
I put it to that if the officer had any grounds for concern, that he would have made his job to have a look around.
You would hope so, but again, you can't always guarantee that with the best will in the world.
Okay. He says there were about 200 people present, but that's just his guesstimate, isn't it?
Indeed.
He didn't count.
No.
Okay. And then unfortunately, we've got a number of complaints during the evening of the noise nuisance. And then we've obviously got your video evidence. Now, the evidence that you have produced says that nearly 7 hours into the event, it's complying with the law. That's right, the reference to the officer's attendance.
Yeah, that's correct.
But it's accepted. This event does fall apart later. We've seen the videos. They don't lie, and there's clearly evidence of a lack of social distancing, which you've pointed out, amongst other things. You said earlier that you've had incidents of publicans ringing you up saying, sorry, how events have got out of hand. So unfortunately, it's true, isn't it, that events can often start off managed in the right way, but go astray.
That's correct. However, in this case, as we subsequently found out, there was no risk assessment in place. There was no management plan in place.
There was no written risk assessment in place. That's correct. But in terms of the question that I asked you, other publicans have called you in the locality and said, help me. I can't control the situation. We've lost control. We can't comply with COVID, haven't they?
Not in the locality, but in the county, yes.
So presumably they, like my client, started off trying to run their pub in compliance with the law. But unfortunately, people are people when they consume alcohol. They forget themselves, don't they, sometimes?
They do, but again, whilst the cases we haven't had where we've had an outside disco anywhere in the county. Like this.
Sorry, the last bit.
We haven't had the circumstances like this one where we've had what is in effect an outside disco set up. There are occasions we've been called to premises because people aren't complying with the rules and they've needed some assistance because of the level of drunkenness or the number of people involved. In this premises, as I said to your client, what I couldn't understand was the marquee at one point had tables and chairs in it. On the video, people are dancing in an open space. So people started moving those tables and chairs. This isn't something that has quickly escalated. This is something that had proper controls been put in place from the start, it wouldn't have happened. It was because of the lack of due diligence and the lack of controls that this has happened. And that is our belief.
Were you present at the party? Presumably not.
I wasn't, no.
No, but certainly at 6:44, your colleague saw nothing to concern himself.
But that doesn't mean you can see what happened.
The video evidence doesn't lie, but the suggestion or inference is that this is something that is quite deliberate and flagrant when it got out of hand. They lost control.
No, I believe it was because of a total lack of adherence to and management over the premises. If you look at the screenshot,
There was a lack of management in the end. They lost control, but other publicans have lost control.
the screenshots where people are mingling, people are having photographs together. Mr. Blakey Jr.'s on there, mixing with different people, having photographs taken with different people. You can see people in groups
Which
behind.
photograph is this?
On the screenshots. He's posing with various people. You can see people behind them in groups queuing up at a bar. This is in daylight, so there's obviously a lack of control that early.
Which page, please?
Mr. Casey, 34. Bottom right. There's a gentleman on the far right.
In the group of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people.
And then in the additional.
We're talking about additional, are we?
No, it's included in the original bundle, and then he's in the additional first page, bottom left.
Because on the additional that I see, I see people taking selfies of themselves and friends, which some of them are standing up. Whether they just stood up for the selfie or not, we don't know. I accept that those people should not have been standing up, but maybe they just stood up for the selfie.
The DPS is stood up with them. And I mean,
Yes, but as I say, how do you know this just wasn't that instant selfie that
on that
people
page, you
tend
can
to
see
take?
people queuing at the bar behind them, so it clearly.
Which I was
Page
looking
34.
at the additional evidence. So you're referring to which page now?
Page 34 of the main evidence bundle, that's the outside bar, which they shouldn't have had because you're not allowed to have people queuing at a bar. There's 2 females, and you can see people stood queuing at the bar behind in a group.
I understand that some payments were being made at the outside bar.
That's my belief, yes.
Sorry?
Not payments made, they were collecting alcohol. There was pumps at the outside bar, they were serving alcohol from the outside bar.
I don't doubt that didn't happen at the end, but on that photograph, I can't see exactly what's going on there at the bar.
It even says collecting your order.
Yeah. I mean, we'll get a chance to question your clients in relation to whether or not they were serving alcohol. It's our belief they were serving alcohol from the outside bar.
Yes, but going off track, because I've simply been trying to demonstrate that for 6 hours, 44 minutes, the event was going okay. Your officer had no concern. It then got out of hand, but you're seeming to suggest, no, that's not the way it was, as if...
I believe that...
Excuse me, I think we need question, not statement, please.
You've made reference to the infection rates as part of your case. Statistics are always something that you can use to your favour. We're now in step 3 at the moment, which I believe allows people to drink inside. We've now got 22,500 people going to football matches, converging on corridors and escalators, etc. And we've got an infection rate which is much higher, of 89.3 per 100,000 people, according to government figures yesterday, far, far higher than what it was on the 14th of April. So I put it to you, although obviously the rules are in place for good reason, that Boston was hardly a hotbed of infection back on the 17th of April.
So it's gone up because people haven't been adhering to the rules then. So it may be why it's gone up. If you're saying it's gone up, it may be why it's gone up because of behaviour like this.
No, there wasn't any reports of infections following this a vote on the 17th of
Chairman,
April.
sorry,
I'm not,
can I just
I'm not
interject?
sure.
Can I
Go
just
on, Martha,
interject?
I was about to.
It's not, I can't hear what's being said. I think people are too, apologies. I think people are too close to their microphones because it's coming across very fuzzy. I'm very, very sorry. I appreciate this is my error, well, you know, my issue with being remote, but it's fuzzy. I can't hear what's being said. Could that last question please be repeated? I'm sorry.
I was about to interject on that question and suggest that we do need to keep the focus on the matters at hand, not wider COVID policy.
Fine, thank you, Chairman. If we could move on then, please.
Thank you.
we then have your meeting on the 21st of April with the licensee, Dean Blakey and Casey Blakey. DPS was also present, Mr. Davis. That's right?
Yes.
Okay. And admittedly, when you first asked them, how did things go? They didn't front up and say, sugar, it all fell apart, did they?
No, they didn't. They acted very pleased with themselves. They had a good weekend.
Which I put to you as a normal reaction. People don't always straight away, yes, it's gone terribly wrong, because they're fearful of the consequences, aren't they?
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I think that once you challenged them, I think they accepted, yes, it went bad, officer.
No, I don't think they said that at all. I don't think they sort of intimated that it'd been going really well, then it escalated and went out of control.
Yes, it did escalate. We were at 6:44. It was okay. 6 hours, 44 minutes into the event, it was going okay. And then it escalated to what we've seen on the videos. And they accept that that was wrong. You have to take their medicine for that.
Yeah, they accepted that. But what I'm saying is they didn't make any comments as if we didn't know what to do, it ran out of control. They still seem to think, yes, we allowed that to happen. It continued into that. It was a natural progression into that. There was
I think with hindsight, I would have loved to have called you guys and dispersed the event. But they did shut it down at 10 a.m., 10 p.m., apologies. They shut the event down?
I wasn't there.
Okay. And then we've got mention of you testing the toilets for cocaine traces.
Yes.
You are aware, obviously, that the testing that you do is not necessarily 100% accurate, and that there are many chemicals and cleaning materials that can falsely inflate or affect the reading.
That's not my, in my experience from doing hundreds of venues throughout the county, licensed premises. I'm sure there are on occasion, but the readings we get, the machine's calibrated for a certain amount of drugs, cocaine amongst them, and I believe they are accurate readings. And as I say, this isn't a tool to be to premises with. This is a tool to be used to educate premises and assist.
Yes, it's an indicative rather than an evidential thing.
Yes.
Okay, which is what we must get absolutely clear. And for example, you would accept that you could go to a cash point, you could go to a petrol station, and there'll be cocaine traces on the machine, on the pump.
Possibly, but it won't be of those high readings. In the
Please
same way that
please keep it relevant to the review hearing, Mr. Shackleton. Cash machines, petrol pumps are not relevant to this premise.
It is relevant because there's an issue here about drugs.
the readings are indicative of persons using drugs in the locations where they are.
Okay.
Had it been contact traces, they would have been lower amounts. The machine's calibrated now, procedures accept that there are contact traces, but when you start getting to 4.55, they're not contact traces, they are where people have used a controlled drug.
There's no evidence before us today that either the licence holder or the DPS or any of the staff were aware or party to any drug taking at the premises.
No, that isn't our suggestion at all. It's just there is a lack of, again, a drugs policy or a lack of management over these premises.
Okay. In terms of drugs policy, okay, there's not a licensing requirement for that, is there?
No.
There doesn't have to be a written policy.
It doesn't have to be a written policy, but if a
They did have doormen and they did have staff who were trained.
but we haven't seen anything in relation to the staff training. So unless there's some documentation to prove the staff have been trained,
Well,
how do we know?
unfortunately, as you'll appreciate, unlike us lawyers and police officers who keep a paper trail, sometimes people do things but don't keep documentary paper trails, don't they?
No, I disagree. I think a diligent, responsible, professional person, a businessman, does keep a paper trail. And again, if it isn't there, it doesn't exist. That's why it's for them to do that.
Well, that's what us lawyers and police officers will say. If it's not in writing, it's not there. But in reality, people often do things not on paper. And prior to this incident, Mr. Casey, Dean Casey, has been involved with the pub since May 2012. Had there been any issues or matters that have been brought to the attention of the police about drugs?
There is incidents and some intelligence, but nothing that we've acted on.
Because I'm told that the record is clean, apart from an incident when they first took over the public house, that their record is a clean record and that they like to keep a clean pub.
Clearly, the premises isn't one that is concerned with us, as we've included evidence in that.
But there's been no police action, involvement or reviews alleging any negligence on the part of the publicans in terms of drug use at that establishment.
Not prior to this review, no.
And I think you will also accept, although you like me, you're probably not a scientist, that even if there's a deep clean of the toilet, there's no guarantee that it will remove traces of cocaine.
Depends how well it's cleaned, clearly. And obviously, what we don't want is premises just cleaning the toilets very well, so the itemizer doesn't work. We'd rather find readings, then we can work with the premises to show them how to.
Well, there's no guarantees a deep clean will remove all or any traces of cocaine.
I think if you bleached everywhere thoroughly and did all the surfaces, you would probably get rid of everything. In the same way, at the moment, we're swabbing people's hands on nightclub doors because they're using the hand sanitizer. We're getting very low readings to what we'd usually get because people are keeping their hands cleaner.
Have you or any of your officers been around the pub, the garden, to see what safeguarding measures were in place?
What do you mean in relation to safeguarding?
Tables apart, signage, one-way system, marquee only being 50% open.
When we did the visit, obviously we observed the beer garden. There were some signs in place, as I said during my presentation. But again, you can put signs up, but they don't work on their own. They only work if you have the policy in place to back those signs up.
They were working at 6:44 p.m. on the 17th of April. Did you see that there was a one-way system to the toilet?
Not to the point we were there, no.
Did you see on the entrance that there is a table requiring you to either do the QR code for the app or give your name and address? Yes. So there were measures that you could clearly see were in place.
As I said, there appeared to have been some attempt to make some compliance.
I refer to the new evidence which we've only received today. We've got an unfortunate incident where a chap appears to be having some sort of seizure or fit outside the public house on the 17th of May. There's no evidence other than the fact the person is by that pub and his mates say that he was in that pub, that the licensees have done anything wrong or done anything negligent or not done anything they should have, is there?
It shows a lack of control. As I say, the PCSO saw persons wandering around the beer garden, no masks on, holding alcohol, etc. And there is no members of staff visible. You would expect that in an environment that's supposed to be controlled, that there would be regular checks done to ensure it is controlled, and that appeared to be not to be in place.
Did the officers have a look around for those regular checks?
Well, no, because they were dealing with two males who were
So how do you know they were regular checks?
Well, because for the period they were there, no members of staff were seen, were visible, noticed the commotion that was going on, as the officer said.
Well, they're outside the pub, and how long are they there?
They were outside the pub, I believe, at least for half an hour. So again, had someone been checking the pub,
but not in the pub garden.
No, but they were next to the pub garden, and the customers who were in the pub garden had come across through the pub garden. They were in the pub garden. So the argument is the fact that if you've got a pub garden, you've got people using it at the moment, well, not just at the moment, at any time, you should be having regular checks on that environment.
Yes, but how do you know checks weren't being made? Because the officers are focusing on this poor chap who's having some sort of fit or seizure.
Because nobody approached those customers who were wandering around and asked them to sit down, did they?
Just because they didn't approach these people doesn't mean that people were once in a while just having a look to see what's going on outside.
Oh, again, I disagree. I think it shows a level of
what standards are you expecting then in terms of monitoring people in the beer garden? People, unfortunately, will take drugs covertly.
Yeah, and again, the drugs may not have been taken on those premises.
And that was the other point I was going to come to. I'm told this person had not been drinking in this establishment, but had just recently attended and was possibly someone he consumed his drugs somewhere else.
It's possible. Obviously, the other people there said they had taken it with them on that premises, but again, this isn't a court, it's on the balance of probability.
Well, we'll hear from my clients in that regard, because there is a clear dispute about any suggestion that this person may have been consuming drugs on their establishment. And then we've got the videos of the England-Croatia game, which happened on a Sunday, I think, about a week or so ago, where we see somebody with a flare. Were you aware that that person with the flare was immediately ejected from the pub and barred?
No, because obviously your clients haven't given us any evidence in relation to anything of this, have they? So no, I'm not a mind reader.
I'm assuming that the only evidence you've got is on the videos, i.e. there wasn't a police attendance.
No.
There wasn't any complaints or incident reports.
Not that I'm aware of, no.
And I think, unfortunately, the time we see the videos was when apparently Raheem Sterling had just scored a goal for England. And even me and my 10-year-old daughter jumped up off the settee.
I'll accept we have fan zones, etc. That is always going to be a challenge. But I think from watching those 5 footage, clearly the way the people are congregated, the way they're behaving, they weren't behaving like that just because. It's very easy for you to say, but again, we don't know what was happening on there because we can't see the big screen, can we? So,
well, we're going to hear from my clients with the explanation of what happened, because you see on one of the videos that some of the people appear to be running towards or into the marquee. Did you notice that?
They seem to be moving. I wasn't sure whether it was in or out, but again,
yeah.
Where's the control levels? There's no control whatsoever, is there?
Things happen, particularly when England score goals, and hopefully they'll score a few tonight. But things can happen spontaneously.
They do, but not spontaneously. That anybody who does a risk assessment for a football match, unless you are, where's the trigger point going to be? Oh, it's going to be one of the two. It's not rocket science.
The publicans are living in a very difficult time at the moment. It's very difficult.
Can I ask you to speak one at a time, gentlemen? Sorry, please don't talk over one another. Apologies.
Thank you. And can we please keep to question rather than statements or assertions, please?
So, in summary, you say that this was a complete, blatant disregard by my clients of the law in terms of COVID restrictions?
Yeah, because had your clients wanted to stop that disco, you turn the music off. It stops it. Nothing was done.
They said they made a mistake, but you acknowledge up until 6:44 p.m. that the event was being saved for the noise.
No, I don't.
You don't accept your own officers.
So PCS went, whose knowledge of it may not be full, but if you look at the evidence before you, the photographs, the outside bar, that it wasn't compliant, and then that was why it got worse, because they were never compliant from the word go. They were paying lip service to it, and this could have been prevented by having robust management in place. In the same way in the football, it isn't the fact that England scored a goal. Every single football matches, pubs show football matches all the time. If you've got opposing fans there, where's the risk? It's when one of the teams scores the goal.
Well,
it's hardly rocket science.
I was watching the game last night, and in Copenhagen, where they were supposed to be having restrictions, the crowd in the square were jumping up and down, throwing beer.
So that makes it all right for your
It doesn't make it all right. I'm trying to.
One person at once, and I'm not convinced that Copenhagen is relevant.
What is relevant is human actions and human behaviour. If I can deal with the nuisance before I finish, please. The noise nuisance.
Martha, if you'd like to come in, please.
Just making the point, I think you've asked plenty questions about the 6:45 incident and whether it was compliant pre-6:55. I think the police made their statement. You've asked questions on it. The police have answered it. Please, can we look to move on to your next line of questioning, please, Mr. Shackleton? In the interest of brevity.
I'm grateful. I just want to ask a few questions about the noise nuisance, which you're aware, aren't you, officer, that usually the pub out of COVID times is an indoor live music venue?
Yes.
And that there've been no complaints of nuisance when they've had their live music indoor?
Not that I'm aware of.
And so I think this was the first time they'd had an outdoor event. And basically this was an isolated complaint, wasn't it, of noise nuisance?
Depends what you, it's a loose definition of isolated, but it
just that day.
For all those hours of that day, yes.
Yes, it was just the 17th of April.
Yes.
Okay. I'm grateful, thank you. I'll finish, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shackleton. My fellow members of the committee now have the opportunity to ask questions of the police. Councillor Wellborn, do you have anything to ask? You're live.
All right, right. I have just sort of one comment or question, obviously, to Sergeant Enderby. You've established in your, I must say, experience, because I gather you're a very experienced officer, that they weren't compliant and this could have been stopped at a sooner time than what it was, and that the staff were not doing what they, in your opinion, should be doing as COVID compliant. Am I correct in that?
Yes, I think in my opinion, and with the evidence that's before you that we have from both the screenshots and the actual point at the marquee where everybody is dancing, for it to have built up to that level at any point prior to then, had people been sitting down inside the marquee, had there not been room for them to dance, had the DJs been playing at the correct level, had once people started dancing, they did some intervention to prevent that, turn the music off, put the lighting up or whatever, what it became could have been prevented. It was because of a lack of any attempt to control it, I believe, that we ended up with the situation as we have.
And obviously, both of the Mr. Blakeys did nothing at the time to control it, or any other member of staff, in your opinion?
No, I don't believe they did.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Pickett.
Well, it looks like nobody at all was in charge, because somewhere reading in this, Casey Blakey said, well, I'm not in charge because it's my birthday. And Dean Blakey said, well, I'm not in charge because I keep going out to fetch ice. So who is in charge? Who was in charge?
I think these are questions for the police at this stage.
Well, that was the question I obviously asked, because they hold the positions within the licensing regime on the licence, and both of them abdicated responsibility, but was unable to show that there was somebody in overall charge.
Thank you.
Thank you. You've answered my question.
Thank you. And I'll now invite our licensing officer to ask any questions you might have of the police. Can you put your microphone on? Thank you.
Thank you. We do have in the report the roadmap for reopening that was relevant at the time, but I have no further questions for the police. I think it's covered it all. I attended the initial meeting with Sergeant Enderby, and I agree that his recollection of that is accurate.
It's questions, but thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much. We now have Mr. Davies, who is our environmental health principal environmental health officer. I understand it's now for you to present your case, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much. Everybody hear me okay? I'm Nick Davis. I'm Principal Environmental Health Officer at the Borough Council. As part of my remit, I deal with licensing issues for the team. I've been in the EHO for 30 years. Going actually on to the issue at hand. On the morning of the 15th of April 2021, I received an email from police colleague Gina McConville advising that she'd seen a Facebook posting indicating that there may be an event at the railway pub, including entertainment. There was some email discussion, and I advised that I would go and speak with Mr. Blakey to ensure that he understood what he could and couldn't do under the current COVID restrictions, or the COVID restrictions were in place at that time. Subsequently visited the premises that same morning. Mr. Blakey, unfortunately, I was told was out at the bank. He had a couple of chaps who I think were his friends as much as workmen, working in the yard, assembling tables, I think there were at the time, if I recall correctly, for outside. I hung about for a few minutes to see if Mr. Blakey would return, as he seemed to be some time. I left my card with the said gentleman and asked if Mr. Blakey could give me a call on his return. Later that morning, as I hadn't heard from Mr. Blakey, I rang Mr. Blakey myself. I explained the nature of the call and why I was calling in relation to what had been seen on Facebook. I explained as clearly as I could the restrictions in terms of music, the volume. It must be at a level that people can reasonably talk and not having to shout, or they shouldn't be singing and dancing, etc., etc. And Mr. Blakey said he understood all that, and that things were in place, and he understood the rules. In fact, I felt Mr. Blakey was sort of like, right, get this conversation finished, because he knew everything. So obviously, I also gave out some advice actually about a marquee that was there. No specific reason other than to try and avoid an issue, because obviously marquees have to be 50% open to be considered outdoor space. So that's my initial contact with Mr. Blakey. On the 19th, I was again contacted by PC Gina McConville, who advised me that there had been a number of complaints made to the police, which have been outlined in the police's statements, regarding loud music emanating from the premises, and that a large number of people were in attendance, and other issues concerning social distancing around the event. Anecdotally, a colleague who works in our own department lives about a kilometre from the premises, who mentioned when it was discussed in the office that they could hear music, whether it be from the railway or otherwise, but believed it be from the railway, and they live about a kilometre away from the site. They could hear the bass. In light of the police reports, I arranged a meeting with Mr. Blakey and the police, of which you've heard about that meeting from Sergeant Enderby. That was arranged for Wednesday the 21st. However, prior to that, I was made aware by PC in the Congo of a number of videos, or 2 videos that actually showed a large number of people singing and dancing in the marquee, and there appeared on those videos to be no adherence to social distancing rules. On Wednesday the 21st, we attended and met with Mr. Blakey, that's Dean Blakey, the premise licence holder, and Mr. Casey Blakely, the premise supervisor. Also in attendance were the Sergeant Kim Enderby and Miss Anna McDowell, the licensing officer. Sergeant Enderby initially asked the licence holder, Mr. Blakey, if he knew why we were having the meeting. Mr. Blakey said he was aware that complaints had been received regarding noise, and that he turned the music down when he was visited by the police officer earlier in the evening. Mr. Blakey did not mention any COVID-related issues. He also asked by Sergeant Enderby if the premises had a COVID risk assessment. Mr. Dean Blakey and Mr. Casey Blakely advised they were not aware they had to have one, and confirmed that they did not have such a risk assessment, either in writing or otherwise. Government guidance of working safely during COVID-19, restaurants, pubs, bars and takeaway service gives guidance for people who work in and run pubs, bars and takeaways. The guidance is freely available on the government's.gov website, and it clearly states that all employers must carry out a COVID risk assessment, and not to undertake a risk assessment may be considered a breach of health and safety law. Mr. Casey advised that he'd looked on the government's website and did not see anything about risk assessments, but read about masks, social distancing, track and trace. I mentioned the specific guidance above. A copy of the guidance was then given to Mr. Blakey that I'd taken with me. Sergeant Enderby gave advice and said a risk assessment needed to be undertaken and be available at the request of the local authority, police, trading and standards. Both Dean Casey Blakely apologised and advised they would get this in place. Sergeant Enderby then asked about issues on the night around social distancing, non-seated service, dancing and singing. Little mitigation was offered. However, Mr. Casey Blakely did say he had door staff to try and maintain standards, and they were supposed to deal with this. And Mr. Dean Blakey said he had turned the music down when asked to by the police, and stopped at around 10 p.m. when, quote, things got too much. They offered that they believe people got out of control after the excitement of seeing friends and getting out of lockdown. Mr. Blakey, the Blakeys were then shown videos by Sergeant Enderby of the evening posted online, which we've also seen now, by third parties. These showed a large number of people dancing, singing, drinking in the marquee and yard with no adherence to social distancing measures whatsoever, clearly in breach of COVID guidelines. I'm being asked to comment whether Mr. Dean Blakey or Mr. Casey Blakely could offer no further explanation as to why COVID guidelines would be breached, other than what they'd already offered. I advised that Mr. Blakey that whilst ignorance was not an excuse in respect of the music or the social distancing issues, that they could not even claim this, as I had spoken to Mr. Dean Blakey prior to the evening concern, who was clear in his response that he knew the guidelines and these would be followed. I asked Mr. Dean Blakey, how many people he would normally expect to have in a public house on a Saturday night, and on suggesting 40 max at one time, he indicated more than this. I pointed out to him that estimated on the night between 200 and 250 people, and asked why this was the case if this event had been advertised. You can't advertise a music event. It has to be incidental to the consumption of food and drink seated at the premises outside at that time. I afterwards was aware of a post on social media involving Mr. Casey Blakely. He advised he had spoken to a few friends, etc., and that it was his birthday. A number of, as it was his birthday, a number of people had come to celebrate. Well, the current COVID government indicates music for entertainment is allowed to be provided if it is not the main event and for the benefit of those eating and drinking while sat at tables. The guidance requires that any venue operating any hospitality event, the guidance requires that any hospitality venue should follow the guidance for restaurants, pubs, bars and takeaway services, which includes the need to ensure that music is kept to a low volume and that customers should not be encouraged to sing, dance or gather around the performance. During the discussion with Mr. Blakey, it also became evident that customers are coming to a small external bar to be served when current guidelines require table service only. Mr. Casey Blakely explained they thought this was appropriate when the bar was outside, as he had seen a bar operating like this elsewhere. I believe he stated Grimsby. Correct me if I'm wrong. He was informed that this was not the case and that guidance required food and drink sales and payments to be made by customers seated at tables. Mr. Casey apologised for his misunderstanding. Excuse me. Within the statement, there's obviously bits about Sergeant Enderby carrying out drugs testing. Obviously, that's I was there to witness that he did that, but I don't propose to sort of make any statement on that. Prior to leaving the site, the Blakers advised that they had another tribute band booked for the 8th of May and asked myself and others attending whether they should cancel this. They were clearly advised, bearing in mind it was a rock band, that it could not realistically take place in compliance with the current restrictions. They advised they would cancel. That's what was said as we left. The following morning, on the 22nd of April, I was made aware by a colleague with Environmental Health that on the Railway Public House Facebook page, after initially having announced the aforementioned entertainment had been cancelled, this had now been reversed and the event would still now take place. And there was a screenshot indicating that. Now, what I would say about this is obviously to sort of make that decision after the meeting only the previous afternoon does seem a bit of a strange one. Whilst the event eventually was cancelled, it does seem rather odd that they still thought they could probably have a rock band in the garden and still comply. From the police reports, what I've seen on video, there's clearly, as far as I'm concerned, a clear breach of government coronavirus restrictions, which runs the risk of spreading, the virus into the local community, the customers to the local community, to people at home and beyond. And also in terms of the number of complaints and the distance intensity of the music that was reported, I do believe there's been a clear breach of the prevention of public nuisance criteria. Yes, I've finished.
Thank you very much. In which case, Mr. Shackleton, if you have any questions for Mr. Davis, please.
I do, thank you.
Absolutely not.
Thank you for your help. Yeah, so you went to see them on the 15th of April to do the decent thing and to make sure they knew what they were doing.
We try and educate people first.
And I bet they wish now they'd listen to you a bit more.
You might ask them that.
And the reason you went to see him is because despite what some people say, the rules and the guidance, all of it is not always crystal clear to the average publican or the average businessman or whatever it may be.
There is an element of that. I must admit there is an element of that, but we are here. Most of this is about, like the public nuisance side, it's about prevention. So if we can help business, because we're not there just to punish business, we're there to assist business. So in the spirit of that is why we went along to ensure that they did know rather than presume that they...
Yes, and I appreciate your intentions, and I only wish, and they do now, that they'd given you a bit more time. When you did speak, I think you talked about social distancing, the music level, the marquee being 50% open, those sorts of things. Is that right?
Correct.
Did you speak specifically about the risk assessment and the need for it to be in writing?
I didn't know.
Okay. Because that seems to be the issue here, that they got some ideas, hadn't they? They knew about social distancing, masks and tables, but they didn't know about written risk assessment. When they saw you after the event, they were unaware of that requirement, weren't they?
They obviously had some ideas of some of the things they needed to put in place. However, I still maintain, whilst telling them they need to keep the music to a volume that people could talk over, you shouldn't be hearing it half a mile away down the road. And, you know, that just says everything to me in terms of their willingness to cooperate with the guidance out there.
Mm-hmm. But you obviously didn't go to the party, the event.
No, I didn't.
Okay, great. Good job, or we've been in trouble.
Yes.
But I think you went a few days after. So did you see the sorts of steps that they had taken to try and be COVID compliant?
As Sergeant Enderby said, yes, I did see some signage. I do believe there was a track and trace QR code. Don't recall totally, to be honest, but there were certainly some things there, yes.
Did you have a look at the marquee?
Yes, I did look at the marquee, but it wasn't in operation at the time.
I appreciate. Was it open at the time in the sense as it should be 50% open?
I don't think it was, but at that point it wasn't in operation. There was nobody sat in there.
Were the tables set out, or were they?
Yes, they were set out.
And were they set out at distance apart?
Yes, they were. Bear in mind, this is after the event.
I realise this is after the event, but unfortunately we can't ask you what happened at the event because you weren't there. But after the event, there were signs of compliance.
There were some signs of compliance.
Some signs of compliance. But the biggest failure here, I think you would agree, was that there was no written risk assessment.
No, I don't agree. I think the biggest failure here was blasting the music out and not controlling the people in attendance.
Because
that's the biggest failure.
I think a big factor here is would you not agree, the length of the event from 12 noon to 10, the fact that you've got music playing. I think if you'd done a risk assessment, I think the conclusion you'd come to is that you need to not only to make sure the volume's down, but to shorten the event.
Well, if the music was played where people could talk in the beer garden over it, it should be no issue to anybody beyond that premises. So it doesn't matter what time it is.
But we know that when people are consuming alcohol for a lengthy period of time, unfortunately, we all can sometimes just lose our inhibitions and forget ourselves.
I think the complaints are about music and not about voices.
Yes, but what I'm getting at is that the people the evidence that we've got from the police is at 6:44, people were social distancing. Clearly, when we see the videos later, they're not social distancing. And the point that I'm making, and I'm asking you to draw on your experience, is that the likelihood is, or a big factor in this, is that people have become inebriated with the alcohol consumption after such a period of time.
Can we have a question, please?
This is a question, sir, and they forget themselves.
No, that's a statement. Can we have a question, please?
It is. I'm asking Mr. Davis, does he agree that people do?
I'm not a social scientist, but I from my own experiences, you would, having been on the premises, people tend to get louder when we've had a drink. Yes, if that answers your question.
And when you saw them on the 21st of April, although they first of all didn't put their hands up and said it went terribly wrong, awfully sorry, they did acknowledge and accept it had gone wrong, and they did apologise, didn't they?
They did.
Okay. And then we've got this discussion about, they said, we're thinking about having a rock band. And I think you said that's a bad idea. You're probably going to end up breaching the rules. And they initially sort of toed and fro, but they did cancel the event eventually, didn't they?
I was quite amazed at the question, to be honest, when the reason we'd just been there for the last hour and a half was because of loud music and non-adherence to COVID requirements. And then to talk about having a rock band 2 weeks later.
But now we've got a different approach from them. Now they're opening up to you. Whether you think that was a stupid thing for them to say, they're now saying, okay, you're here to help us. We're opening up here. We're thinking of having this event. And although they've toed and froed, eventually they have said, right, we're cancelling this event, because it did get cancelled.
It did get cancelled, but I can't read their minds as to what they thought.
Okay, but the event got cancelled after they had raised it with you as a good idea or not, and you put them right on that.
I hope to think so, yeah.
And they did tell you that they did tell the DJ to turn the music down, and that, albeit late in the day, they did switch it off at 10 o'clock.
They told me that they turned it down after the police visit, which was, I think, from 6:44. So I'm assuming that the police officer, PCSO in attendance, thought it was loud at that time, contrary to the view that it wasn't loud at that time or before that time.
Now, are you aware that usually out of COVID, that the Railway Pub is known as a local live music venue?
I'm aware they have had music events, yes, indeed.
Yes,
yeah.
and these events are usually indoor, aren't they?
General license requires indoors. However, under Live Music Act, I suppose they could have outdoors, but yes.
And environmental health, it may come to your attention if there's a nuisance concern. Have you received?
Well, I don't know where we're going with this, but no, we haven't of recent times.
Okay, and when we talk about recent times, we're obviously talking pre-COVID.
Yes, we're talking pre-COVID, yes.
Yeah, okay. And subsequent to this incident, have you had any nuisance complaints?
I think I just answered that question. We haven't for over recent times. And when I say recent times, I check the records before coming here.
So
we don't keep records for a certain number of years.
So according to your records, we've got Sunday the 17th of April, and that's it for noise nuisance.
It was Saturday.
Was it Saturday? It was the 17th of April.
It was a Saturday. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I apologise. I'm not trying to. The 17th of April, this one day was the day of the nuisance, and nothing before since.
No, we've had nothing before or since, but it does not give somebody carte blanche. You can cause nuisance on just one evening.
It's entirely accepted that there was a nuisance that day with the music. What I'm trying to establish is that it's an isolated event, which you're, I think, agreeing with me.
What I'm also saying is, whilst it is more likely to be considered public nuisance the more often something occurs, it doesn't mean that if one event is so obtuse that it can't be a nuisance.
Mr. Davis, we've accepted that.
Excuse me, one person at a time.
Sorry, can we just take a 2-minute comfort break? Would that be applicable?
How much longer?
I think I've finished with Mr. Davis. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Then very quickly, I shall invite my subcommittee to ask questions and then take a break before we get on to the next stage. Colleagues, do you have any questions for Mr. Davis? Councillor Wellborn. Go ahead.
Mr. Davis, you were very good in approaching the railway club, the railway pub, in the fact of stating what they needed to do. Have you done this to many other premises?
Yes, we're trying to give advice, and that's what we're trying to do throughout the pandemic. Ever since March 2020, we've given out lots of advice. We've had teams of COVID advisors with working with environmental health, both across the Alliance, to go and visit premises, to give advice, check compliance. So generally speaking, yes, we've tried to advise wherever we can with the resources we have.
In a lot of those premises, and I have noticed in a lot of...
Can you put your microphone on, please?
Yeah, sorry. I'll move it this way. I've noticed in a lot of premises locally that they have a COVID compliance sort of sticker in their window to say that they've got the rules and regulations set out. Was there any such sticker in the public health?
No, it wasn't, but I think that's not a necessity. That's not.
No, I know it's not a necessity, but what I'm saying was most
not that I recall. I would hate to say no, but not that I recall.
I'm just saying that most pubs who are compliant are displaying it. So obviously, if they hadn't realised that.
Questions.
Sorry.
Thank you. Do you have any more questions? Do you have questions? Thank you. Councillor Pickett, please.
No, Chairman, I haven't got any questions now. Everything's been answered. What I wanted to know.
Thank you. Mr. Davis, do you have any final points?
No, I don't.
Thank you. In which case, we will take a 5-minute adjournment until 25 past to allow for comfort and for car parking.